Thank you, Scott. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. It truly is an honor for me to be here with you this evening. And I say that it's a real honor to be here. And it's an honor for me to be here to share some ideas with you. In tonight's talk, I will be using my book, Journey to Wholeness, as an example of post-traumatic growth. The book has a purpose. It's kind of a roadmap for life that focuses on hope and faith, even after experiencing great trauma in your life. I know we've all experienced great trauma from one time or another. My purpose is to help people learn how to live their life to the fullest, the way they truly want to live. I truly would love to get everyone here, maybe motivate your thinking tonight to perhaps make some of the ideas that I present. Hi, Mary. To make some of the ideas presented here tonight part of your daily living. One of my heroes in life made this incredible statement. He said, "Far greater it is to have done mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who live in that gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat." Now, that statement was made by, I think, a great president, President Theodore Roosevelt. And I think what President Roosevelt was trying to tell us is that no matter how hard we're trying in life, chances are we're going to fall down or get knocked down 1,000 times. I think he was also saying that to succeed in life, we've got to get up 1,001. Well, how do you do that? And why is it that one person can suffer a great trauma, a great loss in their life, and have it destroy their whole world, and another person actually grow under very similar circumstances? Well, that's what we want to concentrate on, that growth. Post-traumatic growth. I'm going to share with you my story, how I found healing after experiencing enormous loss in my own life. I'm going to share with you some tools that helped me regain my physical health, my spiritual health, and my mental health. And not just regain, but actually grow on this journey to wholeness. I'm going to share some tools with you. The first tool I'm going to share with you is attitude. I'm going to give you what I think is the best definition of attitude I think you've probably ever heard. And I'm going to give you a tool to help you remember it for the rest of your life, and I'm going to share some other tools with you. I'm going to tell you a story about me and my family, about where I'm from, and about what qualifies me to be here tonight talking to you about these subjects. So let's get started. On November 14th, 2007, a little over 6 years ago, my entire world changed. I was on a business trip. I was between flights at Dallas Love Field. I turned my phone on to call back to Austin to talk to Debbie, my wife. When I got her on the phone, she was frantic. It was then she broke the devastating news to me that earlier that day, our beautiful 39-year-old daughter, Cammie, had committed suicide. That's a picture of my baby girl. I have to admit, I went a little crazy. Now, when the airport personnel got me calmed down, they set me on the next plane back to Austin. I arrived home to Deb about 9:30 that evening. When I got there, Merrill Wade, who is the priest at the Episcopal Church in Austin that Debbie and I worship at, and two couples, 4 of our dearest friends were there. We were loved and supported by family, friends, and church. We were literally surrounded by amazing grace. I have a question for you. Did you know that angels actually fly in flocks? I assure you, a flock of angels descended from the heavens to hold us in their loving arms. On Sunday evening of that week, we had a visitation at the funeral home. Hundreds of people came. It was an incredible outpouring of love for Cammie. I did not realize it at the time, but an event that I would witness that evening would eventually change the entire course of my life. I want to read just a small excerpt from my book. Cammie was a special education teacher for 14 years. I was utterly amazed to see all, and I do mean all, of Cammie's fellow teachers either at the visitation or at the funeral the next day. But what I will never forget is the children. Two little girls in particular. One, probably 7, sitting in the lap of another girl, probably 12. I knelt down to talk to them. The youngest girl couldn't say anything. She just shook her head and cried. The older girl looked at me and she said, "I love your daughter." She said, "Miss Cammie made learning fun." It was then I realized not only had I lost my daughter, but a hero in life. Cammie had helped students with academic challenges become more confident of their abilities. Cammie didn't just teach reading and writing and arithmetic. She taught children, and she touched their lives. Miss Cammie made the lives of special needs children just a little easier. She lived a life of service to others, and her life had been truly significant. A few days after the funeral, Debbie and I found ourselves alone to deal with our pain and our grief. How do you handle that kind of grief? We were both still in shock. Our hearts were broken. I felt like someone had ripped a hole in my chest. I dealt with some incredible loss in my life before, but nothing compared to this. I'd heard people talk about hitting bottom. Well, for me, bottom was a dark and a very frightening place. I started questioning everything in my life. The first thing I questioned was my sanity because I thought I was going crazy. The next thing I questioned was my faith, my religion. I questioned God Himself. We had some serious discussions. For the very first time in my adult life, I was having trouble coping with day-to-day living. I was constantly sick. I was very fragile. Would I break? Would the pain go on forever? Well, thank heaven for an absolutely incredible wife and friends who saw the depth of my pain and knew I needed more than just their love to make it through this. As much as they loved me, they couldn't love me out of this. I needed professional help, and I needed it right away. Thank heaven I met a lady by the name of Carmen who became my therapist, my counselor, who spent 16 months with me helping me find the light in the darkness. Also, thank heaven for my 30-plus years at that time of my avocation, which was studying human behavior. Thank heaven for my tools I'd used in the business world to be very successful. I found myself using in recovery. Now, before I tell you about my tools, I want to tell you a little bit about my early life. Utopia, for most people, is a place of mythical perfection. But for me, Utopia was a real place that was perfect. It's a small hamlet about 75, 80 miles west of San Antonio, Texas. My first memories in life started in Utopia, Texas, when I was 2 or 3 years old. When I lived in Utopia from the early to mid-50s, the population was about 175. Any of y'all ever live in a big town like Utopia? It was a great place to be a little boy. I remember it had a filling station with the old glass top pumps, a small cafe, and a red and white grocery that most small Texas towns had at that time. We lived in a small frame house. I remember we had a windmill that pumped our water. I thought that was really cool. I lived there with my mother, my father, and my big brother, Leroy. Leroy is 6 years older than me, and at that point in my life, I absolutely idolized him. My father ran the cedar yard at the edge of town. Now, for those of you who don't know what a cedar yard is, it's neatly stacked piles of different sizes of cedar posts that ranchers use for fencing material. My father would work with a crew of men in the cedar break all day long cutting cedar. Now, this is in the days before chainsaws. They were swinging double-bladed axes. Now, to say this is a tough way to make a living is an absolute understatement. By today's standards, we were pretty poor. That being said, there was always food on the table, and there was always a gift for a birthday or at Christmas. Life truly was perfect for this little boy. It truly was utopia. Now, here's a picture of the Simon's clan in Christmas 1954. I'm this little tyke right here in the middle. That's made in Austin, out on Bull Creek Road, in front of the 3-room house where my father was born. Not long after that picture was made, in the summer of '55, we moved from Utopia back to Austin. Austin is the place of my birth, and where most of my relatives still lived, at least the ones that hadn't followed Dad to Utopia. Some of them are still there. A few years later, in fact, it was in 1960, I was 10 at the time, almost 11. It was in April, and I remember it was a Wednesday evening because Mom had gone to church. I have no idea where my brother was. Dad was at home, and I had been at a friend's house playing, had come home. It was probably 7 or 7:30 in the evening. I walked in the front door and called out to Dad, and there was no answer. So I walked on in the house, and I start walking down the hall, and I hear this really strange gurgling sound coming from the bathroom. A sound I will never in life forget. So I walk up to the bathroom door, and I call out to Dad again, and still no answer. So I turn the doorknob to open the door, and it would only open just a couple of inches. So I pushed as hard as a little 10-year-old boy could. And when the door finally opened, I found my father lying in the floor. In a pool of blood, with a rifle lying beside him and a bullet wound in his forehead. I ran screaming to the next door neighbor's house. He verified my story, called the authorities. I remember later that evening I was taken to my grandmother's house. When I got up the next morning, my Uncle Ed was there. Uncle Ed was one of my father's brothers. He set me in his lap and tried to explain to me that my father had gone to heaven. My mother had a nervous breakdown, and my father's suicide was never discussed with me. Never discussed with me in life. You see, in 1960, suicide wasn't something to be talked about. It was something to be ashamed of. Sad thing is, in some circles, it still is today. I began having nightmares, began having what we now know as, or now call, the 7 stages of grief: shock, denial, pain, even irrational guilt. Anybody in this room ever suffer from irrational guilt? I did. I was wondering if there was something I had done as a little 10-year-old boy to cause my father's death. Now, as irrational as that was, I still had those thoughts. A little 10-year-old boy's mind does not have the maturity to understand a father dying, much less such a violent death and at his own hand. I really felt abandoned. My mother's emotional unavailability pretty well left me alone to navigate life. A few months after my father's death, my brother, who was 16, almost 17 at the time, eloped and was married, leaving me alone with Mom. I can honestly say a pretty crazy, dysfunctional time of my life. A few years later, Mom remarried a gentleman who was a friend of my father's, who I became very fond of. We became very close. But when I was 16, I followed in my brother's footsteps. I eloped and was married. My first daughter, Dawn Michelle, was born 1 month after my 17th birthday. That's called children raising children. 2 years later, Cammie was born. 3 years later, the marriage ended in divorce, with my ex-wife getting custody of both of my daughters. By the time I was 22, I'd lost my father to suicide, my family of origin to grief, a wife to a divorce, and my 2 daughters to a custody ruling, and that was just the beginning. Now, my life has also been wonderful. Like on February the 11th of 1972, I met an angel. She's in the room tonight. Her name was Miss Deborah Lee Cox. We fell head over heels in love. Debbie loved and accepted my 2 daughters as if they were her own. Not too long after Debbie and I met, in the spring of '72, I got a phone call about my Uncle Hunter. Now, my Uncle Hunter was my mother's sister's husband. So he was an uncle by marriage. No blood kin. But Uncle Hunter and my father were closer than any 2 brothers you had ever seen in life. And he had always been like my second father, especially after my dad died. He was a master welder. He worked at a machine shop in Austin. And I went to work for that machine shop under his supervision when I was 17 years old, and he taught me how to weld. We have 2 huge barbecue pits that John Graham can tell you about that are 13 feet long at St. Matthew's that I built. The phone call was to tell me Uncle Hunter had committed suicide, exactly like my father had. Another incredible blow for me and for the entire family. Later that year, Debbie and I were married. It was and still is a loving and stable relationship. December of 13, we celebrated our 41st wedding anniversary. Now that's called success in life. Here's a picture of Debbie, who hasn't changed much. Cammie was a senior in high school, and that's Tiffany. That's our second Lhasa. We're now on the 4th. The significant thing about me in the picture is my hair still had color. Since then, it's turned gray. And the bad thing is now it's turning loose. Not long after that picture was made, I got a phone call from my mother. One evening, she was frantic. My stepfather, who had been ill for some while, evidently had wandered away from the house, and that was just not like him. So I was about to leave and go over to her house to help find him. And I got a phone call from one of her neighbors, and they had found my stepfather in a storage building in the backyard where he had committed suicide. Now you know a great deal about the trauma and the grief I've gone through in life, and I know every person in this room has suffered trauma in your life. I will want to share with you some tools I used in the business world to be very successful, and how I found myself using these same exact tools in my recovery. The first one is attitude. Now, I think attitude is the base that all the other tools depend on. How do you have a good attitude? You choose to. It's a decision you make every day when you get out of bed. When someone asks me today how I am, how I'm doing, I tell them I'm wonderful. I want to run a little experiment here. I've never done this before, but I want to try it here tonight. Can I get everybody to stand up? Great, thank you. Now, on the count of 3, I would like everybody to say, I feel wonderful. 1, 2, 3.
I feel wonderful.
Okay, now, we're going to do it again, but this time I want you to stand up straight, raise your chin up, and say it about 2 or 3 times as loud and really mean it. Put a smile on your face. On the count of 3, say, I feel wonderful. 1, 2, 3.
I feel wonderful.
Thank you. Everybody can sit back down. Now, there's a couple reasons I wanted to do that. Don't you really feel better? I have found in life it's virtually impossible to say you feel wonderful and kick the dog at the same time. You can't do it. Life truly is about attitude. And besides that, I woke you up, and now you'll stay awake for the second part of the talk. The man most of you know as the father of modern psychology, William James, made this incredible statement. He said, the greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. Now, William James said that back around 1894-95, well over 100 years ago. The amazing thing to me is that if James were alive and making that statement for the very first time in 2014, it would be just as true. Well, how could I be wonderful? First, let me say, I think I had a very good understanding of what attitude's all about, and I personally don't think most people do. Let me explain. I'm sure my mom was similar to all of yours. My mom would look at me if I had done something wrong, and she would go, young man, you had better change that attitude. Y'all ever get that? If she ever went, Larry Elton Simons, you had better change that attitude, it was too late, and there were consequences to be paid. When you got to school, wouldn't your teachers tell you that if you changed your attitude, your grades would improve? Sure they did. I guarantee you, whether you're male or female, your coaches would tell you if you change your attitude, your performance on the field or on the court would improve. You'll win more games. I've been in sales and sales management since Moses was a pup. I guarantee you, sales managers will tell their salesmen, if you change your attitude, your sales are going to go up. You're going to make more money. Marriage counselors tell people they're talking to, if you'll change your attitude, your marriage is going to improve. All through life, we're told by people in authority over us, if we'll change one thing, our attitude, our whole world is going to improve. I challenge each person in this room to ask the next person you meet outside this room tonight to give you the definition of the word attitude. Think about that a second. Chances are they can't do it. Now, you would think that anything is incredible as this one word, attitude, that can change anything in our life, so we're taught, would be known by everyone. Sad thing is, it's known by very few. I'm going to give you the best definition of attitude I've ever come up with, but first I want to tell you how I think our Creator put us together. I think we're put together in 3 parts. We have a conscious mind. That's our thinking mind, the part of us that thinks. We have our subconscious mind. That's our feeling mind, the part of us that feels. And then we have our body. The body simply takes and acts out the thoughts and feelings of the mind. In today's world, that's known as the cognitive behavioral process. Thoughts cause feelings, cause actions. That's important to know in life. It's critical to know in a time of recovery. Now, I'm going to give you a tool to help you remember that process and the definition of attitude for the rest of your life. This is it. This was life-changing for me in my mid-20s. Okay, so I didn't have a very exciting life. This is an incredible tool. This is Stickman. The first part of Stickman is the thinking mind, the conscious mind. That's the part of us that thinks. On the very first few pages of the book that I know most people in this room own, and none of us read near enough, it says we're given dominion over. We can reason. Do you know that's what makes you different from all the other animals in God's kingdom? We can reason. We get to choose our thoughts. We take that God-given ability, we choose that thought, and we send that thought into our subconscious mind, to our feeling mind. Now, that part of us works completely different. The subconscious works completely different than the conscious mind. The subconscious mind basically accepts every thought we feed into it. It basically says yes. So any thought that you feed in over and over and over and over again, it takes, it believes, and it acts on it. I don't care if it's a good thought, a bad thought, positive thought, negative thought, truth or a lie. It takes it, it believes it, and then the body, which is nothing more than the servant of the mind, acts on it. That's where we get our results, our actions in life. If you want to change your actions, you want to change your results, what do you have to change? You have to change your thoughts. I'm going to give you two statements. If you don't remember anything else I say here tonight, please remember these two statements. Thoughts are things. They're the most incredible thing and important thing in the world because we become what we think about. We attract everything into our life with our thinking. Here's the next statement. Your conscious mind, your thinking mind, is the gatekeeper to your soul. Think about that. It's a true statement. Best definition of attitude I've ever come up with is this. Attitude is our mental position or our state of mind expressed by our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. We're right back to cognitive behavioral process. We're right back to the stick man. But now you've got the definition and you've got a tool to help you remember it for the rest of your life and share it with other people. Share it with your children and your grandchildren. That's important stuff. We truly become what we think about. Even in recovery, we have to have an attitude of gratitude. We have to have an attitude of recovery and growth. Next tool I want to talk about is goals. Now, before I get cranking on this, let me tell you, first of all, you can ask my wife, I am a very goal-oriented person. I have used this tool to set long-range and short-range goals. I've used it to obtain business goals and personal goals. I've used it to obtain both physical goals and spiritual or emotional goals. But what does goal setting have to do with recovery, with growth? I think a lot. A few months into my counseling with Carmen, I started thinking a little clearer. And some of my old habits, my good habits, started kicking in. I think successful people form successful habits. Successful habits form successful lives. I had formed habits that had helped me be very successful in the business world. They started kicking in, and my habit of goal setting kicked in. And I came up with a goal in grief. Now, Carmen thought I was a little strange. I told her my goal in grief was to work through the grief back to wholeness. I just wanted to be whole again. I'd always functioned at a very high level, and I was barely functioning at all. I knew that it was going to be a long journey. but I also knew it could save my life. Harry Emerson Fosdick was a great theologian that lived back in the 1800s. By the way, I was speaking at Fort Hood. I'm a frequent speaker at Fort Hood, speaking to troops with PTSD. And I told them about Fosdick living back in the 1800s, and one of the young men said, "Did you know him personally?" I told him I was born in the first half of the last century, but not the 1800s. Anyhow, Fosdick was a great theologian. He said, for any life to be great, you have to have three things. You have to have focus, dedication, and discipline. I'm going to touch on all three very quickly. Focus. You have to have an idea. You have to have a goal. You have to have purpose in life, even in a time of great trauma. He said you have to be dedicated. You have to have desire. Do you know that everything in life starts with desire? And in recovery, you better have a burning desire. And last but not least, you have to have discipline. You have to do the hard work, even the hard work of recovery. Well, I was focused. I had a goal to work through the grief back to wholeness. I was dedicated. My desire was a flaming white hot fire. I wanted healing more than anything in life. And I was disciplined. I went to group counseling sessions. I went to my weekly counseling session that always was supposed to be an hour session that never lasted an hour. They were always 2 and 3 hours long. I believe that we can reach any goal in life that we can visualize. I wanted healing more than anything in my life. Little did I know that working through this process, I would actually grow. Now let me make one thing very, very, very clear right here. I did not grow because my daughter died. I grew because my daughter lived. And I came to have such an incredible amount of gratitude to our Heavenly Father for allowing me to be her earthly father for 39 years. I think most people have success messed up in life. I think the correct definition of success is the progressive realization of a worthy idea. We must remember goals are very important, but goals are the destination. Success is the journey. And you have become successful in life, even in recovery, when you decide what that goal is and you take that first step toward it. That's success in life, one step and one day at a time. I love what King Solomon said about goals. King Solomon, if you believe that black book, was the wisest and wealthiest man to ever live. He lived 10 centuries before Christ. King Solomon said, where there is no vision, the people will perish. No vision, no goal, no roadmap for life. Always remember what King Solomon said. Where there's no vision, no goal, the people will perish. I love what James Allen wrote in his beautiful little book, As a Man Thinketh. If you haven't read it, go buy it. It's one of the most beautiful books in the world. You need to read it every year. Allen said, as you think, you travel. As you love, you attract. He said, you will realize the vision, not the idle wish. I think the problem with most people is they wish positive and they turn around and they think negative. Remember, we become what we think about, especially in a time of great trauma in your life. We need to have the attitude of gratitude, and we need to have goals in our life. Goals are very important. Next tool I want to talk about is natural law or universal law. Now, George Bernard Shaw said, "Shallow men believe in luck. Wise men believe in cause and effect." I offer these as a set of rules to you. I think this set of rules can help a person live a more abundant life, which I personally think is your birthright. I'm not saying all the laws are covered here. I simply offer these as a set of rules. I think you need to examine them for yourself to see if they're useful to you. They've been very useful to me in my personal and business life, and they were very useful to me in my recovery. Let me explain why. This is the way I think the Creator put everything together in the very beginning. And if we are going to live and breathe and heal and grow, doesn't it make good sense to know how it's all put together and what the rules are? So that we can work with the law, not against it. It can actually aid in our recovery. Now, I'm going to cover the 7 natural laws. I'll spend most of my time on the last one, and that's the law Emerson called the law of laws, the law of cause and effect. Now, each law is important in of itself, but they all work together like the teeth on a fine Swiss watch. I've studied natural law for 30-something years, and I just find it fascinating. In truth, there is but one great law that these 7 sub-laws come from, and there's 2 ways of looking at that. One would be the scientific point of view, and another would be a theological point of view. Now, I'm not a scientist or a theologian, but please permit me just to give you these 2 viewpoints. A scientist would tell you energy is. It's neither created nor destroyed. And it is constantly in a state of motion, constantly vibrating, constantly moving. It's moving from form, through form, and back into form, but it is not destroyed. It simply changes form. A theologian, a true theologian, would tell you God is. He may go on to say He's neither created nor destroyed, is the cause and effect of Himself, and is 100% evenly present in all places at all times. So we have a great power that's everywhere always, but it's never destroyed. Some people may think these 2 points of view butt head. I personally don't, but I think that's something everybody has to work out in their own heart. Now, I'm going to cover these 7 laws, and like I said, I'll spend most of my time on the last one. Here's the 7 natural laws. The first one is the law of perpetual transmission and transmutation of radiant energy. Wait just a second. Before I get into that, let me tell you why I think the laws are so important. Everyone in here understands the law of gravity, right? Everybody learned it at a fairly young age, and you understand that anything heavier than air, if you drop it, it's going to fall toward the center of the earth. And as an adult, you wouldn't think of walking off of a 10-story building because you know you'd fall to your death. But we have all certainly seen on television, on a newscast, or read in a newspaper where an infant or a child fell out of a window or crawled off of a balcony and fell to its death. And someone may say, how could God let that happen? I personally don't think God had anything to do with it. It was a human being going against the law. And you may go, but wait, Larry, wait just a second. It was an infant. It was ignorant of the law. Let me assure you, there is not the slightest allowance for ignorance of the law. If you don't understand the law, it can hurt you or it can kill you. Okay, first law, the law of perpetual transmission and transmutation of radiant energy. Now that's a mouthful. And all that is saying is that energy is moving from form, through form, and back into form. It's changing forms, but it's never destroyed. I want to do a little visualization exercise here. I want everybody to close your eyes. Visualization is very, very important. Close your eyes, and I want you to imagine a pot of water, and it's a big pot of water. And it's setting on a stove. And it's a gas stove because you can see the flame underneath the pot. And the water is starting to boil, and you can see it boiling. And you can see the steam rising. And then you can see the steam disappearing into the atmosphere, into the etheric as water vapor. It's gone. And if you leave that pot of water on the stove long enough, it will boil completely dry. All that water will be gone. Okay, everybody open your eyes. How many people saw the pot of water? Visualization is very important. Now, if this were a glass of water, not a bottle of water, and I had ice in the glass, the moment the outside of the glass reached the dew point, what happens? Condensation, which is water. It's water. So you had energy moving from form, through form, and back into form. Water becoming steam, becoming water vapor, becoming water again. Now there's hundreds of applications in your life for this, every day. There's one real important one to me in my life right now, and maybe to some other people in this audience tonight. My baby girl didn't die. She changed forms. That's what my black book says. And one day so will I. And we'll be reunited. And you'll be reunited with your loved ones. Folks, if that doesn't light your fire, your wood's wet. The next law is the law of relativity. We invoke the law of relativity every day. We want to invoke it to our good, not to our detriment. Is an apple sweet or is it sour? If you compare an apple to sugar, it may seem sour. If you compare it to a lemon, it may seem sweet. It's neither one until you invoke the law of relativity. We do this all day long. We want to use the law to our good, not to our detriment. I could have been saying, Cammie's death is going to kill me, instead of looking for a way out. We need to understand these laws. Study the law. The next law, the law of vibration or the law of attraction, this is a paramount law. Our thoughts vibrate. We attract everything into our life by the way we think. This is a very, very, very important law. I promise you, there's not enough time to tell you the stories. There are so many God moments that happened to me in my recovery where I knew, because of the way I was thinking and other people were thinking and praying for me, that things were attracted into my life. The perfect therapist and counselor. There were so many things that happened. There were so many God moments that it would happen to me and I'd go, "You did it again." It was just incredible. Very important law. There's a law of polarity. Law of polarity always comes in twos. There's a North Pole and a South Pole. There's a good and a bad. When something bad happens or a failure in your life happens, do you know there is a seed of greater equivalency planted at exactly the same time? When something bad happens, something good can come out of it. The worst thing that's ever happened in my life was my baby girl dying. I'm having the time of my life, not because she died, but because I've looked for a way to honor my daughter. You've got to be looking for the good that can come out of bad. Study the law. There's a law of rhythm. Now, one thing I may not have said, which I should have said before, is all the laws work on all three planes of understanding. They work on a physical, spiritual, emotional, and intellectual plane. The law of rhythm works on all three. Life has a rhythm to it, and we need to work with that rhythm, not against it. On a intellectual plane of life, there are days when you can get the answer to a question just like that. There are days you're going to have to get up and walk away from it and come back later to get the answer. On a spiritual plane of life, there's going to be days when you feel like walking down the street singing with the birds. There's going to be days when you want to wring the bird's neck. Understand that. Work with the rhythm of life. On a physical plane of life, there's going to be days when you could go out and whip lions. There's going to be days when you feel like curling up in a fetal position. I tried that after Cammie died. It didn't work. Understand that life works on all three planes of life. And the law of cause and effect, I'll come back to in just a second. And then there's the law of gender, or the law of creation. All that is saying is that for every seed that's planted, there is a time of germination. A farmer doesn't plant corn one day and reap the harvest the next. He does what James Allen said in that beautiful little book, As a Man Thinketh. He waits as one who understands. A seed is planted in the sex act. And 280 days later, approximately, a miracle happens. A baby is born. But we wait. We understand there's a germination period for every seed that's planted. The most important seeds that are ever planted in your life are seeds of thought that are planted in your mind. And they're planted there every day. I hope I'm planting some very good seeds in your minds today, because I know they can and will grow. Now, last but not least, I want to cover the law of cause and effect. That's the law that Emerson called the law of laws, because we live in a cause and effect universe. Now, I'm going to prove to you how this law works on a physical plane of life. How many people in here remember a guy by the name of Sir Isaac Newton? He gave us stuff that we all loved in school. Yeah, calculus, trigonometry, all that fun stuff. He also gave us the laws of motion. And his third law of motion states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Now, you can use that law to prove the law of cause and effect on a physical plane of life. Keeping in mind, it works the same way on a spiritual or emotional or intellectual plane of life. How many people know what a Newton's cradle is? A Newton's cradle. Oh, this is good. Everyone's seen one, you just may not know what it's called. Yes, it usually see them, they're about this big. It's a little wire frame, and it's got 5 little steel ball bearings. And you see them sitting on somebody's desk, and you think it's a toy. You'll never see it as a toy after tonight. This is my Newton's cradle. I'm going to use my Newton's cradle to show you and prove to you how this law works on the physical plane of life. Keeping in mind, it works the same way on a spiritual or emotional or intellectual. Now, I'm going to pull one ball back, and my mind is telling me I'm going to let it go, and it's going to hit those 4 balls, and it's going to whack them, and they're all going to go flying, right? But that's not what the law says. Look what happens. So it hit the 4, but only 1 at the other end went. Why was that? Because it's the law. If I pull 2 back, watch what happens. Two go. Why is that important? Do you know what you get back in life? Exactly what you give away. It's not better to give than receive. If you don't give it away first, you never in God's kingdom get it back. Even in healing and recovery, you've got to do the work of healing first. Success in life always comes disguised as one thing: hard work. And healing and recovery is hard work. Now this thing gets really weird. I'm sorry, watch this. You pull 3 balls back. There's only 2 there, right? So it's got to hit the 2 and they go flying. But watch what happens. You pull 4 back, there's 1. Why is this so important? My wife coined a phrase called stuck in grief. If you find yourself or somebody you're working with stuck in grief, you might ask, what have I done today to heal my body? What have I done today to heal my mind? What have I done today to heal my spirit? I don't know about in your church house, but in mine, we talk about it every Sunday. Healing mind, body, and spirit. Plato, who was a pretty astute chap, said there is no healing until you heal mind, body, and spirit. You might ask him, are you focused? Do you have a goal? Are you dedicated? Do you have a burning desire to heal? And are you disciplined? Are you doing the hard work of healing? It's not easy. It's the hardest work in the world. Some people may think it's pretty strange of me to talk about natural law in connection with healing and recovery. But I don't think so. You know why? Because I think this is what it is. It is the natural order of an omnipotent God. It's the way He put everything together in the beginning. These are His laws, not mine. These are laws of nature. And in a time of great trauma, it makes very good sense to me, and it helped me so much to be able to understand these laws and work with them, not against them. Before Cammie died, I thought my life, my retired years, would be spent going back into corporate America, where I spent my life. I retired from General Electric as a consultant, teaching my tools. Through the last few years of my life and through all the counseling and everything I've been through, I see a better way to use these tools. And that's to help hurting people heal. I truly do not know what my future holds. But I do know that my prayer is our Heavenly Father will use me as a tool to help hurting people grow. I love what Carol Stodasher said about this subject. She said, you do not heal after the death of a loved one because time passes. You heal because of what you do with the time. I want to thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. You've given me your time and your attention. I'm going to end with some very brief words from a very beautiful book by John Maxwell. It's The Journey from Success to Significance. And I think it's a journey we all truly want to be on. John said, when you're 80 or 90 and you're sitting on the porch rocking and you're looking back at life, how will you feel about it? He said, you won't have to answer to anyone else or to live up to anyone else's expectations. What will you have done with the gift of life? He said, the answer is going to be important to you then, so the question should be important to you now. He said, the course of our life is determined by the relationships we form, the actions, the decisions, the choices we make, and the actions we take. Each has the potential to change the course of our life. John went on to say, if you're not doing something with your life, it does not matter how long it is. Then he said, if you're doing something with your life, it doesn't matter how long it is. He said, life does not consist of years lived, but of its usefulness. He said, we must live beyond ourselves. He said, if you are loving, serving, helping, giving, and adding value to others, you are living a useful life. And that is significance. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.